when we did our very, very simple use MVC. This is always the way, though, isn't it? Where you teach someone the really low-level stuff, and you say, remember all that hard part that I showed you? Yeah, forget that.
You don't need that anymore.
You don't need that.
You don't need that
anymore. MVC. It's better. Okay. I'm going to cheat, and I'm going to take a little bit of code that I had lying around, and I'm going to paste it in here. This code that I'm going to paste in here is the code you would get when you say file new MVC application.
Okay, so this already comes pre-baked in the MVC template.
So you don't even need to know anything. This is automatic. This is what they call the default route. I just wanted to bring it in because remember that we built this application up from Hello World at command line.
Yep. So you could just you could grab this from a new application and dump it in here, and it would work.
Yep. Or you could just file a new project and use that new application, and that would just be what you use. Okay. So I've changed that. Let's just look at the difference. There's use MVC, and then there's the one that you can pass in routing information. So that's the one that we're going to paste in right there. Oops. There we go. So use MVC, and now look at that map route. We saw a map route before. This is a little more sophisticated. We named it. We have controller / action / something. So this is like blog / post / 6.
Okay.
Okay. What's this though?
The index, is that referring to a page?
This is referring to a method, and that is referring to a controller. So for example, let's say that I went and passed in /home. I'll do it with a comment. Or I passed in /home / index, or I passed in /home / index /5, right? Or Scott / products /4. This is the default controller name. So if I just pass in // it will automatically call home, index, and then in this case, the ID is optional.
Oh, that's why it has a question mark.
Yeah. So we will go and we'll figure out. So right now, according to this, the default controller is home and index. Let's go look what our controller is called Maria. Let's get rid of those there, okay? And let's make Maria and something else the default. Okay, so I think we will hit /, and that will be the default. Let's find out.
So Maria will be the default now.
Hope so. So that said, hello Maria from MVC, just right there. So let's talk about this process here. It needed to make a Maria controller, and it needed to call a particular public method. So we mapped by saying this is the default. If you don't have a controller, use Maria. And if you don't have an action,
use something else.
Use something else. Okay. Let's try passing in /home / index. There is no home controller. Wasn't there a Maria / index? Let's try that. Maria / index. So that one works. So that makes me think I can probably go and say public class Scott controller, public string index. And instead of doing a lambda, I'll just do it like this. All right. Notice that I haven't added anything about routing there.
Nothing at all.
What routing information are we using? The default.
Default.
All right. Scott. Okay. Did not work. Index.
Huh.
All right. So
why didn't Scott not work?
All right, let's look at this again. What's the default action called?
Miriam.
No, that's
no. Sorry. Something else.
Right. Did Scott have a method called something else?
No, but
no.
For Maria.
So these are silly defaults then, with all due respect to Maria and something else. Let's change them back to reasonable defaults, home and index. That means that index will be the default for any controller.
Absolutely any of them.
Anything, unless I change the routing at some point and come up with another plan for routing. So here, I should be able to go and say /Maria and /Scott, and I'm getting the right controllers. And you can even see this happen as it says controller action invoker, right? The thing that invokes the action, that starts the action, is being called, and it says, I'm executing the action method. This is really important to think about because we're effectively calling methods just by changing the URL, right? Like I say /Scott, and the Scott method gets called. Like that index method rather gets called when I every time I hit that. And that's because there is a controller action invoker that is doing that. So let's back up then and look at the green-haired girl. All right. Oops. So this beginning relationship where it's like /home/index uses routing, and someone makes the controller. They call it, they new it up.
Okay, is new it up?
That's what we say. Like when you, like, who did you remember writing? We didn't write new, var x equals new controller.
No.
Who made it?
We did it in Visual Studio by adding a new class.
No, but who made it at runtime? Who created a new controller? Every time you hit a request, a controller gets made.
Yeah.
And someone calls the function.
And that's what's called newing up?
No, the newing up is the making of the thing. Like you'll notice that we have a controller right here called Scott controller.
Yeah.
But there's no code anywhere in the entire application where I went and said new Scott controller. Someone else ran new. They had a controller factory where they're passing Scott controllers out and Maria controllers out.
Okay.
Does that make sense? So the idea is that we have a request that comes in. The routing system says, okay, which controller's handling this? All right, I'm going to new one up. All right.
Okay. Yeah, I see it.
See? And now I'm going to call it, call index, call whatever, and then I'll throw it away.
Okay.
So we're making all those calls. So now we need to do something and like make a model and talk to a view.
So the controller manipulates it to a sense, but then what happens?
Whatever you want. So in this case, let's talk about this. We went and returned a string. We kind of cheated a little bit. I'll show you a little trick. We said that our controller returns string. Well, controllers actually return a thing called iActionResult. And it's basically a promise to do a certain action. It says, here's the action I want you to take. So when I gave you a string, I was really saying, make me a view and pass the string back, okay? And iActionResult there's a bunch of different options. I think we can actually search for iActionResult. And there were a bunch of options. Content result, file result. Think about that. Someone says /Maria in the URL. What do you want? Usually you want HTML.
Yeah, usually.
But you could also have JavaScript, a file, some HTTP status code. Maria might redirect you somewhere else entirely. A content result is like empty strings. It's just a user-defined a bunch of content. So when we said, hey, it's Scott, and we returned a string, we were really going and making a new content result and putting string Scott into that thing. And there's, in fact, a helper method for it. There's a base class called controller that we're going to use. And in controller is return content. And let's look at what the help says. Returns a content result with the current string. So what I want to say to you is that these two things
Are
go ahead.
those two things the same?
Effectively, the result is the same between those two indexes. But that's no fun to write.
No.
That's a kind of a convenience. Okay? So to your point with our friend here, let's this time go to controllers and then just switch directly over to views and come back, because we're moving our way around this
So we're going to leave models alone for a bit.
for just a second, and we're trying to figure out how this view situation works.
Okay.
Okay. So instead of returning content, let's return a view. Okay.
So that means in order to return a view, don't we need to add something?
We absolutely do. But I'm going to pretend that I don't know that.
Okay, let's rewind.
Yeah,
We had no idea that happened.
No, it's fine. So let's pretend that we don't know that. And let's visit our page again. So it was /Scott.
Yeah.
All right. /Scott. Now, are we in
Is your
production?
application still running?
It is still running. And you'll notice
You've got a few.
a couple of things. I want to point this out. This is a great opportunity for us to both learn. We got a 500 error. Okay, 400s are mostly it's your fault, and 500s are mostly it's the server's.
It's the server's fault. So
Okay.
we shouldn't feel too bad about it.
No, because the site may have a programming error. So they're basically pointing the finger at us.
At us anyway. Okay.
So why aren't we getting a friendly error? Why aren't we being told?
What exactly it is?
Yeah, where's the yellow screen of death or the light blue screen of death that tells us, oh gosh, you forgot.
I remember earlier, did we have a user? Developer exception page.
So we say app use developer exception page. That's the page for developers to see their exceptions.
What's happening
But it only happens in one scenario.
if it's in development?
It's in development. So I'm going to go back to my command prompt here, and let's scroll back. Oops. I'll run it again.
Because I believe we are to see what mode we're in. Yeah, we're in fancy production.
Yes. We didn't just have regular production.
We had a fancy one.
We have fancy production. So fancy production is decidedly not even close to developer exception page, right? To development. Fancy production is fancy. So let us change our properties for our application to development. Because you wouldn't want an exception page to go out into the world
No.
that showed all your code.
Yeah, that sounds like it would be bad.
It happens all the time. It happens all the time. People are sloppy. All right.
Okay, that looks a lot friendlier.
It is friendly. Not only is it friendly, but it shows you the query string and cookies and headers that got passed in. And it's saying something very specific. So let's compare. Let's put the code next to it so we know what's going on. /Scott controller, that's cool. Remember that index was our default.
Yeah.
Okay, called index. And we said return view. The view index was not found, but it looked in a very specific location.
So that's really neat. So it knew exactly where to go.
Right, because remember I said before, convention over configuration.
Yeah.
Maybe in the old days, like last week, there would be some configuration file somewhere that would say, all the views are over here.
Yeah.
And views should be, but this is more of a convention where views are in the views folder. And views have a subfolder, which is the name of the controller. And then the action is the name of the file.
Okay.
So if I change this, let's just I want to make absolutely sure that we're clear about this. I'm going to make another action result. fancy, totally unreal. How do I spell?
Unreal.
Unrealistic.
That's close enough.
You think that's enough?
That's enough.
Is that too much?
It's overwhelmingly great.
It's a little extra. Okay, so I'm going to run this.
Oh, but did you notice it showed you a couple of potential fixes?
I'm sure it probably didn't like that name at all. Scott/fancy totally unrealistic method name. I just like messing with the error handling system. The view, fancy totally unrealistic method name, was not found. So it shows you that there's an absolutely direct relationship between the name of the method and the file it looks for.
So it has to have the same name.
It has to have the same name.
So
unless I pass in a name, and we'll talk about that in a second.
Okay, and one thing I also noticed is that there were two view folders.
Ah, that's a great point.
You had views, which is Scott. Then you had shared.
And all the different times that we've been doing this, we've been getting shared as an option. So it searched them in that order. It says here, the following locations were searched. First I looked here, and then I looked there. So you're right. Shared is somewhere that we could have one view that Maria and Scott could use.
Okay.
Okay. So let's start by fixing this first scenario.
So I assume you'd have to create a new folder called views.
Exactly. So we'll do that. Now, of course, we won't have to do that when we start with an MVC application that's done entirely with the File New Project experience, but this is good to understand how the process works. So new item, ASP.NET view page. We'll talk about layouts a little bit later, and I'm just going to call it index.
And the C, that's something I always notice, the CS with the HTML. I always call it the C# HTML.
Yeah. It's CS/HTML, or it's the color razor page.
Oh, okay.
There was talk about making it .razor because it would sound really cool, but apparently it would involve changing a bunch of stuff they didn't want to change. Would have been cool though.
It would have been cool.
This is my index view. Here's some HTML. This is a paragraph. Yay. Okay. All right.
Oh yeah, you're finally writing in.
Yeah, I get, I got a little lazy there. Oh, I got to make sure that my application is set up for IIS and that I'm not doing any custom URL stuff. Remember how we set that URL?
Yep.
We'll get rid of that. Okay, and then let's go make sure our launch settings are cool.
Should it have that as a launch URL?
I think so. I don't know. Development 53461. Build it and run it. Aw, well, that's annoying.
So let's have a look at why it's giving you.
Yeah, this is a good opportunity to.
So this is an interesting thing. So before we had the developer exception page that kind of give us a little bit more detail.
That's a good point.
Why don't we have it now?
Well, because we haven't been able to reach anything. In this particular case, it's not even getting as far as the ports. So I'm not even seeing IIS, starting up. So I don't, the browser is not giving us enough information. Now, if I go down here and look at IIS, IIS is on 53641.
Which is the same.
I'm not even thinking. I'm so silly. It's been fine. It's a 404, not a 500. This is important. This is really important. There's a 404, which is saying I didn't find it.
Yeah.
The 500, which says something horrible happened on the back end. Right? Exactly. And then there was this port is totally different and totally wrong. In this particular case, I was moving so fast that I wasn't actually paying attention and did not notice. I just saw, oh, bad error, and I closed things up, which is sloppy of me. So that's a good reminder to folks. All right, so let's try this again. And I keep going up and saying 404, and I change it to /Scott. I'm going to go, with all due respect, and I'm going to change Scott to the default controller.
If you got to.
Sorry. So let's fire this up. There we go.
Okay. So now it's a default. And that's why we were able to go straight and see it.
Exactly. So if we go back to here, we went like that.
Okay.
But there's no model yet. We haven't done the full circle yet. Okay. We need to do something with that model and pass some information in or something. So let's think about that. Oh, and by the way, the view thing, we talked about sharing views.
Yes.
Right now, we're in the Scott controller index method. Your Maria controller can be up here. And I could pass in the name of a view. Like if there was a Scott view, I could pass that view in. Now that's not going to work because there isn't a Scott view, right? But it's not going to go and look for index though. So let's see the difference. Maria/index. So this will be the default. Maria. The view Scott was not found. See, it looked for Scott in Maria. And then it also looked in shared. Now I could make a Scott view and put it in a folder called shared.
I think you have to copy it physically. Okay.
Yeah. So we're going to do that. So we made a new one. This is my totally shared view. Shared. And notice this, I didn't even have to rebuild. I just refreshed because it's looking every single time in that folder.
Okay.
Okay, so Maria is using a shared view, but Scott is using a custom.
Is using a custom view.
Right.
So if you had like a shared template, was this where you do something like this?
Right, and then you could make what's called a layout, a model view, an MVC layout page, which is like the larger layout that everyone can share, and then everyone can have a
the little bits in the middle. Okay.
Exactly. All right, so let's try to pass some stuff in. I think it was called view bag.
So view bag is what exactly?
Well, there's two different things. There's a view bag, which is a place to put content. It's a dynamic.
Okay.
And the other one is called view data. Let's put a message in there. Hello from Scott's controller. Now that's a model. We're just we're stowing it in this dictionary.
So you're putting the model right into the controller.
In this case, the model is not so fancy.
It's just
a string.
All right.
But you got to start somewhere. Okay. So then, can we go back over here and do something with that? View data. Message.
So it should basically say, hey.
Hello.
Hello.
It's not a very good message.
Yeah, it's kind of polite-ish.
No, it sucks.
Okay.
So that model just got passed in this bag or this dictionary of stuff.
So is the model how we share data?
That's how you share data when you are making this circle.
Okay.
So the URL comes in /Scott or /Maria. The controller does stuff, and that's up for debate. Whatever you want to do.
Okay.
Go to the database, log into Twitter, whatever makes you happy. As you pointed out here, it manipulates the model In this case, I just put it into a pile called view data. We'll do another model in a moment, view data. The model is sent over to the view, which then displays it. And then, of course, the person sees it, and then
the cycle continues.
Exactly. Okay? But this model kind of sucks because it's just a string in a bag. And like, what if I go like this? Oops, I misspelled that. I meant to spell message, but I spelled oops misspelling.
Misspelling.
Maybe I'll just say message with 3 S's.
Oh, okay.
Right? That, you could see that happening.
Oh, yeah.
Did it compile? Yeah, totally compiled.
But there's no message, because it doesn't know what message with 3 S's is.
Exactly. More specifically, that returned, quote, quote, nothing.
Nothing was there. So
We're lucky it didn't break everything. But the point is that the compiler didn't see that misspelling because it's just a string. How could it know? How could it know? I can put whatever I want in here, compile, where it works great because it's a dictionary. Not cool. So let's do something better. Let's make another class, public class. I'm just going to call it, Scott index view model. There's lots of ways you could name the class, but this is it's the view model. It's the way, it's the view that, how can I phrase this? It is an object that looks like the stuff the view needs.
It's an object that looks like the stuff that the view needs.
Let's think about it like this. I could go and go to the database and get a product object.
Okay.
So it would be a model, a database model. And I could hand it to the view, and the view could show it, and that's fine. But not always does the view look like the database. Like you might say, here's a product, but you really need products and orders and order details, right? It could be big and complicated. So what I really need is a view model that has a bunch of other stuff on it, and the view model looks like the page looks.
Okay, so let's say we had a database that had people's information, like names, phone numbers, and birthdays.
Right.
So the model would look similar to that, but the way we'd want to display on the page. So if we had a bunch of text boxes.
Right, so if the view on the page looks different from the database, like if it's got name and age, but then address comes from a totally different database, I would bring the two together in the controller.
Okay.
Put them in a view model, and then say, here is what the view, and that way the view isn't thinking about the database.
No, it doesn't need to worry about it.
It gets a dumb object.
Okay.
Okay, so let's go and say here, I'm going to actually go back and say prop tab tab string tab tab name prop tab tab int tab tab name prop tab tab.
That's a pretty neat.
Isn't that cool? Yeah. That's a snippet. Prop, and then you go tab tab, and it expands. So here we just made a Scott view model, and actually I don't need birthday. We'll just do name and age for now. Okay. And instead of doing this, let's make a new one. Okay. Now at this point, I could say .age and .name, fill it out, but I could also just do it all on one line. Okay, so now that is a Scott index view model. It's in this object, and it's ready to go. Now, let's pretend that came from the database.
Okay, let's just pretend there's some database out there.
It comes from wherever. This is part of the magic of the controller. Where did it come from?
I don't care.
Doesn't matter.
Okay.
It could come from Entity Framework that we'll learn about in the advanced and the intermediate day. It could come from a web service. It could come from anywhere.
Anywhere. So it doesn't
It is the controller's job to do that, to find that data, and to, if it has to go to 3 different places, and do it.
Okay.
But then it brings it together into one object that hands to the view. So let's hand that to the view. And we know it's called, in this case, a Scott index view model. We could call it whatever. I'll go back over to my index page. Okay. And I'm going to say @model pass in Scott index view model. And I may need to include